Okay, the subject for today is Git and GitHub. How many of us have an idea of what Git is? Anybody wants, like, if you had to compare Git to something, what would you compare it to? Any ideas? Okay, what about Google Docs, right? If we went into, let's see, we went into, let's see, we went into our Google Sheets, for example, right? And we opened up what we were doing, right? And John was also in this calendar. We can both edit this at the same time, right? Previous to that, we had Excel, right? Where I need to edit or add some records. I had to save it, send it to John. He had to download it, make some edits. If he wanted to save the history, for example, he had to save it as like John's edits, right? Excel document with John's edits, and then he sent it back to me, and then I'm like, okay, I need to add more edits. I'm gonna save it with John's and Kara's edits.xl, right? And then we would need to send it to Rod, and then it's gonna be like final version, date, number 4. Okay, that gets really complicated, because then we know like which one's the final, right? So Google Docs came and it was like, okay, everybody can touch it at the same time. That's awesome, right? So not only do we have like the ability for multiple people to collaborate at the same time, but we also have the ability, I don't know why internet's not coming up, but like we also have the ability for version control, right? If you messed up the whole thing and removed all of my information, then I could go back to and be like, okay, we're back to before, before somebody messed up all the stuff, right? So Git allows for those kinds of features to happen for source code, okay? So Git is what's called a version control system, okay? Version control system. Git is not the only version control system, but it's free and it's open source. Free and open source. So that means that people are keeping it working well, and it's allowing distributed teams to work together on the same project, so that we don't have, if we were all, for example, working on the deaf grandma team, right? I don't have to send John the file and then get John's contributions and for him to say deaf grandma John's version, and then John send it to Taylor, and Taylor saying like, okay, I'm going to add my versions, and then accidentally erase John's versions, but it doesn't matter, they're going to send it to Deja, right? Like, that's a lot of messy work that can do a lot of damage. And Git kind of allows us to have all of those problems solved in ways that are accountable to us and really controlled in a really good way. Okay, now Git sounds a lot like GitHub, right? But they're not the same thing. So let's remember that Git and GitHub are not the same thing, okay? But in terms of its name, Git is the hub of Git repositories. Okay, now we're using the word repository a lot, and I don't know about you, but when I first heard the word repository, I was like, I don't know what that means. Why are you continuing to say this word to my face? Like, that doesn't make any sense, okay? And eventually you're gonna be like, oh, I put all this stuff in my repo and I shared my repo, right? Like, you get to a point where it's like the easy thing for you to say, and it's weird to remember the moment when you didn't know what it meant. But for all intents and purposes, repository just means folder for the most part. A folder or a system of folders and a bunch of stuff that you're basically holding in what you would think of like a bucket or a folder, right? It's a repository of things, okay? Now, GitHub is allowing everyone to hold their repository or their bucket of things on the cloud or the internet, which, as you may see from my sticker, There's no cloud, it's just someone's computer. But we'll learn more about why that's like hilarious in the near future, okay? But for now, GitHub is really allowing itself to be a hub where teams can push their stuff up to a repository that will live online and then let other people on that team download it so that you don't have to like send an attachment on an email anymore, right? You can just hold all that stuff online. Additionally, it allows for you to be able to look at that source code in a GUI interface, right? Or as we learned yesterday, right? So that people can utilize that, communicate, have a conversation about that, approve or upgrade, or have conversations about what should be improved. So all of that kind of discussion and discourse can happen online somewhere in a public space that really perpetuates this culture of open source environments. Question?
Is it only for open source? Or is the company making software private? Is there, they just like put like a private GitHub, or will they not use it?
So the question is about whether GitHub is only for open source repositories, and that is not true, right? So GitHub allows for public and private repositories to exist. Similar sites like Bitbucket, it's a very similar thing, right? But the point is that you are giving the capability of your repository, your folder, to live online somewhere. Whether that's a private repository like our curriculum, right? You all had to be added as a part of the organization of Delta Platoon. So you have access to these repositories, but your friends or whoever else on GitHub do not have access to those repositories. So there is public-private capabilities on GitHub. But the point is, you have a local version of your computer files and folders, and then you're giving people access by pushing those files and folders up to live hosted on the internet for other people to pull down to their local computers. And I'm using these words because that's going to be like the way that you talk about GitHub repositories and Git repositories very, very soon. Okay?
So like other code stuff that's private for us?
Yes. So right, yesterday you were able to clone down a repository from GitHub onto your local machine, and you noticed maybe that it had, so let me see, I'm going to make a folder.
Like papers and private usage.
Okay, so I have my first repository. So you might have seen something that looks like this with the brackets, and it said master in it when you downloaded the Code Platoon. Let me do something real quick. Okay, so now you probably saw something that said master next to your repository that you were working on. If you weren't like 100% focused on like Deaf Grandma 99 99 bottles, you might have seen like on your command line right next to the name it said master, and you're like, I don't know what that is, I'm just going to keep working on my stuff. Okay, that indicates to you that you are working in a Git repository on what is called the master branch. Okay, so I'm gonna actually give these out to you real quick. These are Git cheat sheets from GitHub that explain a lot of the things that you're gonna like learn how to do. Okay, so pass those around. Okay, now no, I have one. You're good. Okay, so we just talked about version control system, free and open source, and Git is the larger system that deals with version control. Whereas GitHub is a hub of Git repositories. There's public and private repos, GUI interface to see source code. Also discussion. okay? So that's kind of the differentiation between Git and GitHub, okay? Now you're gonna be using Git and GitHub together almost in a way that makes you feel like it might be interchangeable, but I'm gonna explain how it's not interchangeable, okay? A friend of mine had a really great way of doing that. And I'm actually gonna put Git and GitHub here. I wish I could use my emoji for cloud, but that's fine. We'll just use that here. Okay. Where is that? So graphical user interface. Okay. That's what it is. All right. So when we're utilizing Git, Git is happening locally on our computer. We're utilizing the process of Git locally on our computers in our repository. So I'm just going to show you a little bit about what I just did. Okay. Git technically is a system folder that would live inside the folder that you created. So if I did LA. So if you see here, or I'll do ls. We don't need all that stuff. So I don't know if you can see this blue part, but like I made a test markdown file just to explain Git and GitHub, right? That's what we're looking at in the code editor. But we also have this .git here. So when I did git init, it basically initialized the system folders called Git. And then inside that folder, there's a bunch of stuff that's basically spending the time to follow everything that you're doing in that folder. It's basically like just sitting in the corner watching you do anything inside that folder, okay? And then when you make any changes, so right now I have no changes. So we can talk to Git when we initialize it. So I can say, hey Git, what's the status of this folder? Saying, hey, you're on the master branch, which is like the main branch. Okay, you have nothing to commit, and commit means I'm going to basically take this and write it in memory. Okay, I'm committing to what I just did. That's basically, if you think about it that way, right? Committed to memory, Git, that's what you're telling them. Okay, and then it's saying working tree clean. So there's like nothing in here that's like changed at all. So you're all good, right? But let's say I want to create a new folder in my repository called, how would I do that?
Sorry, so right now we created a folder on the computer that is now we just sort of connected to the actual online version.
Good question. We have not. And that's part of what I wanted to talk about. Remember, Git is something that you have access to on your computer. We installed it yesterday, right? We told Homebrew, hey, can you get Git for us so that we can use Git? And the Homebrew was like, cool, I can totally do that for you. And then we have Git living locally on our computers.
Okay, so
we're all in our computer.
That you just made
Yes.
It's
so,
like Google Sheets and quality like Google Drive.
Yes, kind of like that. If Google Sheets was like an offline thing, right? If I created an Excel document, right? Nobody knows I made it yet. So nobody knows I have this yet, right? This is my new secret awesome project. Nobody knows. I know. Git knows. Nobody else knows.
It's more like the guts of Google Sheets of what's tracking whatever.
Right, right. So,
but people don't have access to this.
No.
So it's almost like it worked out.
Yeah, so it hasn't been like Google Sheets-ized yet. It hasn't been like a release to the world, right? It's only me. I'm the only one. It's like secret awesome bomb of awesomeness that's about to go down. Nobody knows, okay? So I'm about to make this folder called new stuff, okay? Now if I make this folder called new stuff, and I ls, which is list everything in the directory, I see now I have this new stuff folder and the test markdown folder that I had before, right? Where would I go to
Where
find
did
the
you,
folder?
where's my repository? Where did you
Okay.
see that?
All right, so as I mentioned before, we talk about making aliases, right? So I made an alias called Code Platoon. So it would take me, so normally when you open up your terminal, you end up in this squiggly line, which is called the root, right? So it's a root directory, okay? Now, I don't want to do all my stuff from root directory. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I find it like really frustrating that I have to like go to CD desktop, and then I got a CD code platoon, and then I got a CD delta. Like, that's too many steps. That's dumb. I don't want to do that. I'm a developer. I already know how to do this stuff. I'm going to make an alias. So I made an alias called Code Platoon. So when I typed it, it just took me to this folder. Yeah. So I made that so that's where I am. So, and again, I know where I am because I can do PWD, and it'll tell me, hey, you're a user, right? This is your root folder named Kara AJC. You went to the desktop, you made a Code Platoon folder, and then you made a Delta folder, and that's where you are. Yes, so if I do ls here, I have that def grandma JavaScript folder or JavaScript file we just talked about earlier. I made a GitHub Markdown file that we were talking about earlier.
I think I missed that. What's the GitHub?
That's just this file when I was like, hey, I need to talk about Git and GitHub, right? And then
what is that?
.md is a file type for Markdown files. So GitHub, when you go on GitHub and you look at like today's, yeah. So, and I am still in Sublime. But remember, when we're looking at this stuff here on GitHub, right? We're looking at GitHub. We see like this file that says we're at Tuesday, where this is the stuff that we're doing today, right? If I looked at this file raw, what? That's ugly, right? All these like hashtags and blah, 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 right? So this text is being interpolated in GitHub using Markdown. This is basically syntax for Markdown. It's a text file similar to Word. It's a file type. So when I'm using this syntax with the hashes, it's going to know that 3 hashes means this is a H3 type of text that I should show as a header. If I have this dash, it should show up like.
Is this a specific file type for GitHub? Or it's
well,
many?
Yes and no. This is .md you could use as it's just like .text. It's just a little more rich than .text. Okay? But Markdown is used pretty primarily in GitHub when you need to make a text document. You don't do .text, you do .md, and then there's this kind of syntax that you can use to like make things look nice. Pretty much that's how it is. And you mentioned if it's specific to GitHub, no, but GitHub has a particular thing called GitHub flavored Markdown that has they have like a certain extra types of things you can do in Markdown that you might not be able to do in other websites or applications that use Markdown. Okay, so Markdown MD. Okay, and then we have my folder, my first repository, right? That was the repository. That's the folder I made into a repository. So notice here we're in a Delta folder. There's no like master blah 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 information, right? Because if I ls-a, there's no Git. Git's not watching Delta. Make sense? Because Delta is not a Git repository. It's just a folder, a regular repository, as we might want it. That's a good thing about making sure that you have folder and repository as separate names in your mind, because a repository is typically talking about a Git-enabled folder that's being tracked and version controlled and all that stuff. Whereas a folder is just a folder. It's doing some of the same things, but the repository is doing a little more work. This is a tag that says, show me everything, including system files. Okay, so now that we're all back on the same page, right? I can cd into my first repository and I see, hey, I'm on this master branch. I know that this is a Git repository. Okay, now I can say, hey, Git, what's the status? Nothing. Okay, well, what's going on here? So if I did cd, I made a folder, so I don't know why it didn't show me anything. But if I touch new file dot, let's say empty, or what would be the file type if I want to make a Ruby file? RB. Okay, so let's say I made an RB. Okay, now, okay, now I say git status again. It's saying, hey, you did a thing, and I saw it. Okay, so up here it's saying you're on the branch master, but there's some untracked files. Okay, so it's giving us in parentheses like a hint, but for now it's saying, hey, there's this folder that's called new stuff that you made, and there's stuff in there. So I saw it, it got changed. Okay, now it's saying there's a few steps that goes on when you want to do stuff in Git. Okay, you have untracked files, then you have tracked files, and then you would commit those tracked files. And commit means that you're basically saying, like, this bundle of stuff I did, I'm saving it to memory as a thing I did, right? So if I, for example, in Excel, I made like a new column, right? And I wanted to make sure everybody knew I made a new column, I would save that and say, like, you know, this is a new column on this file, right? Or alternatively, if I said, I'm sending this to John to add his edits to it, and I sent it to John and he saved the file like, you know, Kara's calendar with John's edits, okay? The with John's edits part is basically like saying, I committed this extra stuff in this file. Make sense a little bit? Okay, so I have some stuff that's not saved. Okay, if I wanted to save it, or I wanted to start tracking it, to say like, oh, I finished touching this thing and I want to just like hold on to it, I want to stage it so that I can save it as a commit. Okay, so I would do a git add, and then I would ask for the file. So you can see that here in the Git cheat sheet, where it's saying make changes. It's this review, edits, and craft a commit transaction. Okay, so that's where this is. That's the steps those are the steps that I'm taking right now. Okay, so if I wanted to add this folder to my set of commits, it's on the top right. Make changes. So we did git status, right? Git diff we don't have to talk about right now. I guess technically I could if I wanted to. Git diff. Nothing? Okay. Let's say I said git add new stuff. Okay. Now if I said git status, notice how this changed from like this color to this thing here. Now if I, for example, just save that as like something that was going on, but I moved on from there and I said I want to touch another file dot. Okay. Okay, so this file that I just made is in the similar status that this folder was beforehand. Okay, I have changes that I can commit. This is the file that I had added to staging. Okay, and then this is untracked files. So I have untracked, tracked files, and then I can make a commit only on the tracked files. Is y'all following me a little bit? Okay. So I did this stuff here, and I want to make a commit.
You created that previously, so it's already there.
Yeah, and then I just made this one new, right? So let's say I wanted to also add that to my commit. Okay, I'm just prepping everything. I like to think about Git as like an envelope, and I'm like writing a letter, right? If I'm writing a letter, when I'm done with the letter, I put it in the envelope. Maybe I want to add more stuff, but in the envelope, it's not sent yet, right? It's not sent. It's just staged for me to send it out.
Which means
It's almost at a commit. Commit means I sealed the envelope.
what's the stage before?
Staged.
Stage.
Okay, so there's untracked.
So this new file is staged. You want to make another file staged?
Yes, so there's untracked, means like I see that you've made a change, but you haven't staged it for commit. So like, so this will be like an empty letter. I see that you wrote some stuff on this paper, but you haven't staged it. It means you haven't put it in the envelope. Yeah. So when it's staged, I put it in the envelope, right? When I commit, I close the envelope. I seal the envelope saying like, this is my letter, that's it. I'm signing it, I did a thing, right? When I want to put this in GitHub, I mail the letter. Add. So it'll give you suggestions here. So untracked file, to actually track the file or stage it, it's saying, hey, by the way, you can use Git Add to include it in what will be committed. So if you want this file to be committed, yeah, if you want this file to be added to the commit, you add it to the commit by using Git Add. So you're saying, hey, Git, add this to the commit.
So touch is just a track.
Touch is create a file. It's outside of Git, right? Touch is just me telling the computer I create a file into existence. Yeah. So then if I say Git add another file, now if I do git status, see, now they're both ready to be committed. This is saying, hey, if that was a mistake, you can reset it and put it back to unstage. But we don't want to do that right now. We want to stage these both for commit. So this is saying like, hey, if you messed up, just unstage it. You'll be fine. Okay.
So right now those are two stage. Add means bring file to stage.
Yes. Okay. So I did git status. We did git add. Okay. Now we want to make a commit, right? So if I want to do git commit, so I would say git commit. Now we have what's called -m. -m just means like this is the tag for message. A git commit always has a message. So you can't just commit and like you can't make a commit without saying what you're doing, basically. It's good for you, it's good for everyone to know why you did a thing, because future you even would be like, why did I even do that? Okay? Because you'll forget at some point. Okay? So a commit always requires a message. And the way to do that is -m. And then in there, we remember how to make a string, right? How to start and end a string. Quotations, right? I added some stuff. Now, your commit message should be useful to future you and other people to understand what happens. Commits are technically small chunks of changes that should make improvements on a repository. They should be succinct. So this should not say, they should be concise and succinct. So a commit shouldn't say, I upgraded the OS, and then I, put all kinds of stuff, and then, so all these and thens, those should probably be their own commits. When you start writing and then I did all this stuff, you probably should have made all of those their own commits. Does that make sense? Alternatively, if you're doing all this stuff that is not related, you should also have done those in separate things. Like for example, in the example of a letter writing, right? If I'm writing you a letter about you being accepted into this program, but then I also added a letter about like how I'm going on vacation, and I also added a letter about like how Chicago is really awesome, and I also added like, you don't need all that information. You just need to know whether or not you're accepted into the program. That's it. Like that's all that should be in that envelope, just related stuff. Okay, so commit should be concise and related and small commits. Commit often. Commit often, right, James?
Yep.
Commit often. Okay, question.
Let's say you stage the file, stage the folder.
Mm-hmm.
Then you want to remove that from stage. You reset on the folder name or reset the file?
If you are resetting a file, if you're like unstaging the folder, then you would unstage the folder. So I would say git reset head and then folder /
Way that you put that file inside of a folder.
Right. So if you are, but in the same file, in the same format, you should be able to reset head and then utilize the folder name to unstage that entire folder. When you get to a place where you're dealing with 50, 100 types of files, you're going to want to try and do that one at a time. And you'll get more used to utilizing command line to be able to do this in a more sophisticated way in terms of like staging and unstaging, adding and unadding things. Just know that for now, you really want to be intentional about when you add and remove things from being staged. So you, instead of like trying to like git add everything, you do it file by file. Okay, and that's just saying git add, and then the next thing being the file name. Make sense? Yeah, I don't think I did. Okay. Okay, so I say git commit add stuff, okay? Now, that is this first line here saying on the master branch, this is what's called a git SHA, okay? You don't have to know that so much as it's like basically the identifier of this particular commit, okay? And that's my commit message, okay? And it's gonna give you a lot of information. I can't stress more. Be able to just read what's happening on your computer. It's basically giving you a lot of information, okay? A lot of times you're like, oh, something's broken or I can't do something. It's gonna tell you how to fix it or what happened if you go back and read your command line usually, okay? So we have 2 files that were changed. When I made a commit, I added 2 files, right? So that's pretty accurate, okay? 0 insertions, 0 deletions. Basically, that's saying there were no lines of code added or removed from my previous commit, okay? But I added 2 new files, okay? Create mode, it's saying this is the particular file that was created, and this is the second file that was created. It's very detailed, right? Pretty awesome. Okay, now, how to get Git onto GitHub. If we were to have created this repository on our local machine, we would be able to set what was called a remote connection. So the remote version of this repository would be what we would set up on GitHub. Okay, so we have our local repository, and then we have a remote repository on GitHub. So if we went back to, I don't know if I have, the process that you're most commonly going to use is going to be the one that we did yesterday. So let's go through that process that we went through yesterday, and I'll show you how that works with Git. So that way you can go back to your repository and make sure that you can push up your code to GitHub that you already did, and then we can start understanding the process of the way that you guys will be working every day. Okay? So I'm going to go back to our repository real quick. Where are you, GitHub? Are you here? There you are. Okay, so we're here in this date. Let's go back to yesterday. And I'll just go through the process you all did yesterday, and then we'll finish the process, right? So you know what to do for every challenge from now on. Okay, so we were working on, let's do def grandma, and then I'll add my stuff to def grandma, okay? Okay, so y'all took this repository. We said, go to this link and go to here and click this, right? So you took this URL and you went to your terminal. I'm going to cd out of this again. PWD, where am I? I'm in my Delta folder. Okay, so I'm going to git clone with the E, this folder. So we're cloning into this folder we created called def grandma on our local machine. it's pulling down from the remote branch, remote repository, all this content, okay? So now if I ls, I see I have my def grandma repository folder, okay? So if I cd into that, see again, if I can't finish that line unless I know it's specifically for this folder and not this JavaScript file. Okay, remember we saw that? Def grandma master, I'm on the master branch. So if I said git status, I'm on the branch master. Now it's saying here, your branch is up to date with origin master. Does anybody know what origin master might be? Online, right? So it's the origin master. So we're on a local, we are local on our local master branch on our computer. And it's saying, you haven't changed anything here. And all the stuff here is the same as what is on the master branch that lives on GitHub. Okay, so it's like these two things are the same right now. Okay, so I'm like y'all, I want to say, okay, what do I have here? I have def grandma.js. So I'm going to actually replace that. So I'm going to move. Nope, this is cloning it down. I'm saying I want to clone what's information's here. I'll clone the information that was on GitHub down to my computer. I'm making a copy, basically, cloning it down. Okay, so now I have it on my computer. Okay, now everybody did that, and we all made changes to our own respective files, right? But we don't know anything about what any of us did, okay, yet. So one thing that might be useful to know, so we did git status. If I do git remote, it's going to return origin. Okay, so git remote, like the remote Git repository's name is origin on our computer. Okay, so it's saying the origin folder that you have lives here at GitHub in this folder. Okay, that's the address to it, right? Now, similarly, we're going to learn about like how to, instead of cloning down a repository, how to fork a repository. Okay, fork and clone are two different things. Fork is basically saying like, okay, I see Code Platoon has their version of this repository. I'm going to make my own version that has my name on it and lives in my account. And it's going now I can have this access to this with my username. Okay, and then I can clone down my version of it and push up and pull down and push up and pull down, do whatever I want on this repository. I can do all kinds of stuff on this one. Okay, but now I'm not ruining, or not ruining, but I'm not making any changes to this original repository. It's going to stay here, and it's going to keep an eye on what's going on, but now I'm not going to touch this one. Does that make sense to everybody a little bit? You'll get it, and then you'll get confused, and then you'll get it again, so don't worry. Okay? So, all right. So we have our Git remote. We know that we have our local repository. So I want to make my my change to the solution that I just made, right? That was showed this morning. So I'm going to move grandma.js to this folder. Okay. Let me make sure. Okay, cool. So earlier I had that def grandma folder and the def grandma.js file. So MV means move one file from the origin path to the next path. So that's what I just did.
JS to Github.
Yes, I moved that JavaScript file that I had outside the folder into the folder. You'll see right now. Okay. Oh, CD. Sorry. Come on. Okay. Now. Okay. See, I said git status. What changed? Does everybody see what I changed? I'm an untracked file. Why? I haven't added it yet, but I changed it because, see that file here, and then this file here. Oh, interesting. I didn't just clone or didn't replace that JavaScript file that we originally had. This is, yeah, because it's a different name. So also good point. Keep in mind when you're using underscore and dash, okay? For files, you're pretty often going to want to use underscore and not dash, okay? So just keep that in mind, because you might end up with situations like this, like, why is my code not here? Why is it not working? Because you probably put it in a folder or in a file that's not named what you expected it to be, okay? So this was the file that was cloned down, not what I want. So I'm actually going to delete that. This is the file I do want, okay? So this is the one that we just talked about, that we did this morning, right? Success. Okay, now, if I do git status again, now I see there's two things that happened. I deleted a file, and I added a new file. Okay, so that's what's going on here. Now, this one's already up here. It's not staged for commit, and it's an untracked file. Okay, so I would say git add def grandma.js, git add the change def underscore grandma.js. Okay, now, so I have two files staged for commit. Okay, I have the deleted one and the new file. So there's two changes that I made that I want to commit to memory. Question?
No, I just thought, well, yeah, maybe so deleted file, you're going to stage it. In practical speaking, how do you stage a deleted file? Is it just changing it?
So it's going to commit to memory that file was set as deleted, and then it removes it from the repository. And then if you were like, oh, I messed up, I didn't mean to delete it, I can go back in my version history to a commit when it existed, and I can say, bring this back, and it'll bring it back to existence.
So if you change it to Git, does that change all of this?
Yes. No, it won't. Let's talk about why. So technically, yes and no. Okay, why? Right now, I'm on my local master branch, right? But it is pointed to the origin master branch in Code Platoon, right? And that's not what I want to have happen, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a forked branch. I'm going to create a forked repository, and I'm going to point to my forked repository instead of the Code Platoon one, to the Delta Platoon one. Okay, so when I push my stuff up to the master branch, it'll be the master branch of my repository, not the master branch of Delta's. Because if I push the master branch of Delta's, it will change for everyone. Not on your computer, but when you try and pull it down, and you'll get to a point where you're pulling down code from each other. When you pull down my code, it'll erase your code, or it'll say like, this is all different. I don't know what to do with this information. And then you'll have to do a merge request, a merge conflict. You'll have to like fix that merge. Does it make sense to everybody? You'll get used to it once you do it a few times. Okay? But for now, just know that since I'm pointing to my origin master on Delta Platoon, that's where it would change. But I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to show you how to make a fork repository. Okay. Before I do that, I think I'm going to take, let's take like a 5-minute stand-up tea break because we've just been, okay. Well, like just a 1-minute stand-up break for a second. Yeah, get some stretch out. There is. Oh, there you are. All right. Okay, so we're going to go through the rest of this process pretty quickly because I want to make sure we have time. So when you go to your challenges, you will do the following. You're going to go to the challenge and be like, oh, I got to do this challenge. Then you're going to go to fork, okay? You're going to click fork, okay? You're going to say, I'm going to fork this to my repository, okay? You click you, and then it does this cute thing of like, oh, I'm going to make a copy. Fork, fork, fork. Super cute. Make it happen. Okay, now, notice, instead of Delta Platoon, it says Kara, okay? Now, I know I'm in my repository, so I'm going to clone down from my repository. Now, we already did that, so I went through the process of like dealing with that locally on my computer, which you will eventually know, but you don't need to know right now, okay? In your repository, okay. All right, so once you've made your commit stuff, okay, you will be pushing up your repository information, all the changes you did, all the commits you did, you're going to be pushing that up to your forked repository, okay? So when you fork down, or when you clone down your forked repository, when you do git remote, okay, it should look something like this, okay? Okay, origin is you. Upstream is us, Delta Platoon. Okay, that means it's like upstream. If I like keep swimming up the stream, I get to the actual place where everything originated, which is Delta Platoon. Okay, but for us, I just want to put it to where I'm originating, which is my repository. Okay, so once you want to put your stuff up to GitHub, you say git push origin master. You're saying, hey, git, push this up to the origin remote repository on the master branch, okay? You'll learn about branches soon as well. Typically, you don't ever work from the master branch, okay? Usually make your own branch.
So, but why are you asking?
Because I did my work on master branch. Origin, you're always going to do. You're going to push up to your origin all the time. That's your own repository. But the master branch, you're going to change it to your own name or whatever you want to change. Technically right now, because you're pushing up to your own version of your branch, it doesn't matter that it's on master. Does that make sense? But if you're not ever going to push to master on the upstream branch, the upstream repository. Does that make sense? Question?
So that makes no difference after you fork that and then you make that your node repository.
Mm-hmm.
You can put the origin of master or...
Yeah, so right now I'm going to do git push origin master.
Or not.
Well, I'm doing git push origin master just to show you what's going to happen. Okay? So, Deaf Grandma, that's my version, right? Now, this branch is one commit ahead of Delta Platoon master. I've changed my version of this repository. Okay, there's my commit. Okay, there's me, updates my challenge. I messed up a typo thing. Okay, it shows, okay, this is the code that I added. Okay, and there's the deleted file. I deleted this. They're gone. They're here, yay, success. Okay, now, if I go to Def Grandma Delta Platoon version, has no idea. Okay, doesn't know. Although, what is this? This branch is one. Oh, that's just because it's forked from something else. Okay, now, it has no idea I made that change. Okay, but I want to tell the Delta Platoon teachers or instructors that I made a thing and I did something, right? So I'm going to make a pull request. And in real life, a pull request is saying, hey, I'm requesting that you pull this code that I just did into the master repository. But for your purposes, you're saying, hey, can you review my code by creating a pull request, which will start the conversation of like me reviewing your code and telling you how you did, and you like responding to why you did something this way or that way. Okay? Now, when you do a pull request, you go to pull request, or in that code version, you could say new pull request. Okay? You're basically saying, I want somebody to look at my changes from the original and see whether or not it's good to be pulled in. Okay? So you're comparing the base fork or the Delta repository with your repository. Okay? So it should say the base is Delta, the head one is mine. Okay? So say, look at these two things, tell me what you think. Okay? Now, if I say create pull request, what we did was we created a template for y'all so that when you create a pull request, it already has some information in there. So you can fill this information out instead, and it'll be useful for the process. KRC, pair number one. So we're going to talk about pairing. You can get into that. You'd be able to write each other's names in there, right? But for now, that's irrelevant. Okay. So then I can say, like, I used a counter. It was awesome. Questions that came up. Why did, oops, this prompt not work in the console? Okay, if I had more time, I would make this more fun for the grandma to say things. Okay? And then you click create pull request. And again, you see that those hashtags, that's syntax it's a markdown syntax. Okay? So now my pull request looks like this. Summary solution. This is my response, blah, blah, blah. So we will get information saying like this is what's happening, right? And then we will be able to review your code up here, see you made one commit and that you changed these files. We'll be able to go in here and look like, that was a good idea. Okay, and that's how that review process will go. Does anybody have questions so far? You feel like this is how your challenges are going to go from now on. You're going to fork it, clone it down, do some stuff, make commits, push it up, make a pull request. Questions, thoughts?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and that is what's in this GitHub workflow.
Perfect.
So the GitHub workflow basically says, like, the only thing that's not in here actually is this is assuming that you have already forked the challenge and cloned it down. So those are the only two steps I would add to this. It's assuming you already did that. Okay? So after you forked the repository and cloned your version down, the first step one, it's telling you create a branch. Don't mess up and mess up master. But you don't, like, again, you don't have to, but you can still do that and make this pull request process easy. It's better to just get used to making a branch immediately anyway. So I would just follow this process.
Is there like a sort of a function or like a action from us accidentally, saving over master?
There is not.
Does that happen?
You will do it, and that's okay, because we have version control, right? You will get it done now. You know, accidentally push to master now before you go to your job and accidentally ruin everyone's lives. Okay? Just ruin our lives. It's fine. We'll just go back on it. Okay? Version control is there for a reason. Okay? It's there so we are all protecting ourselves. It saves every version that we commit. It saves everything we commit. That's the other thing. If you delete a bunch of stuff and delete and delete and delete and add a bunch of stuff all day and you forgot all the things you did and then you commit, that's just where you're at. Okay? So commit often. Question, thoughts?
One thing I don't quite get is if you're at these points and you're not going to push off, like get that new approach, push that them up. What about conflicts between your own style and
It's not going to have a conflict because the stuff that you did is going to, it's basically just going to show these are the changes. So we're not going to, like, it's not going to do something where like that merge is going to be a problem. Additionally, at this point, we're not going to merge your code, right? The pull request at this point is really only to show the work that you've done for us to be able to evaluate it. When you get into group projects, which is going to happen actually this weekend next week, next week, you will start doing that kind of thing. That's where merge conflicts are going to come into play. And you will have to look at the code and decide, okay, we're telling Git to merge these two files together. It doesn't know what to do, so we need to tell it what to do. And that's where you'll go through a merge conflict and say, like, this is the right code, this is the right code, erase this code, this is the right code. And then you'll be able to merge that code together, and everybody will be happy. Make sense? Cool. All right, congratulations. You now know Git and GitHub. You are masters of development already, day 2. Be proud of yourself. Okay. That's it.